In chapter one, we are going to just have a nice introduction to criminal behavior. A lot of this will be repeat information for you from some of your other courses that you have taken. You've probably been exposed to some of these theories on crime. But we will have a nice overview of criminal behavior and kind of preview some of the things that we'll be talking about as we go through the course. So first of all, there are a lot of different definitions out there on crime and criminal behavior. For our purposes, we're going to go with what the textbook says. So crime is conduct or failure to act in violation of the laws in this country, in our case, forbidding or commanding it, and for which a range of possible penalties exist upon conviction. So crime in this country and in any country is behavior that violates some type of written law. And criminal behavior is behavior that is in violation of some criminal law or criminal code. One of the things that we look at and try to create in studying criminal behavior are theories on crime. And theories, of course, attempt to explain behavior. And when we look at criminology, we're looking at theories that try to explain criminal behavior. So you might have taken psychology courses or sociology courses or any other course that has theories. And it's always trying to explain some phenomena. And with our case and our class, we're looking at theories that help us to understand and explain criminal behavior. So theories should provide a general explanation that encompasses and systematically connects many different social, economic, psychological variables to criminal behavior. Criminal behavior is very complex. That's why we can take a course like this, because it is so complex. Human motivation is incredibly complex. So when we look at criminal behavior, there's generally not just one reason why a person committed that behavior. And that's why we see so many different theories in criminology and why it crosses over into psychology. All theories in any social science and any science really should be supported by well-executed research that is founded in empirical evidence. And of course, the purpose is to help us to understand or explain criminal behavior. So some of the theories on crime that you may have already been exposed to in some of your classes, and some of these are pretty old theories, by the way, they've been around for a very long time. Just world theories are theories about kind of in general how the world works. At the general level with these theories, it kind of suggests that people get what they deserve, like capital punishment. At the individual level, it is kind of the concept that I get what I deserve. These theories are interesting, not terribly popular because they kind of tend to suggest blaming the victim, which of course we never want to do that. Classical theory. Classical theory has been around for a very long time. The philosopher Cesar Beccaria in the late 1700s was one of the first people to talk about classical theory. It is the idea that human behavior is driven by choice. People weigh the pleasure they gained against the potential punishment. So in terms of criminal behavior, to stop crime, punishment needs to be swift and certain. And this is based on the assumption that humans have free will. Crime prevention programs and the current system is based on classical theory in this country. The modern form of classical theory, because again, this has been around a very long time, is called deterrence theory. And again, it's the idea that that if we have swift and quick punishment, it will deter people from committing crimes. Positivist theory, closely aligned with the ideas of determinism. Determinism argues that most criminal behavior is the result of social, psychological, and even biological influences. This was first discussed by Cesar Limbrasso in the late 1800s. He had an interest in biological features, like the physical features of criminals, and how those physical features could be associated with criminal behavior. Now, his ideas, of course, have long since, past. We don't believe in those kinds of things, like the size of the head or bumps on the head, or your physical presence, like how tall you are, how muscular you are. Modern criminology theories fall under positive view because they look at outside influences. So even though we don't, like the early positivist, we don't suggest that somebody's body frame contributes to criminal behavior, we still look at things like biology, mental health issues. These are some of the things that, of course, we're going to look at in this class. All right, theoretical perspectives on human nature. A perspective, you've probably heard this term in your classes before. We use this a lot in psychology, actually. A perspective is simply a way to view any specific topic. So the conformity perspective is based on the assumption that humans are basically good and want to do the right thing. And it's similar, if you have studied psychology, it's similar to humanism in psychology. It's a very positive perspective in psychology. Now, there are a couple of different theories that fall under that perspective that are very influential in criminology. And actually, most of these came out of sociology, kind of before criminology was an academic subject. So strain theory, this is a sociology theory that was created by Robert Merton. And he said humans are fundamentally conformist. They all want to be, they all want what is valued in any given culture, and access to what is valued is not always possible. We don't have kind of equal access to everything. And so that puts a strain on some people. So he suggested that crime is the result of people seeking what is valued through non-legitimate means. In other words, think of all the things that we all value in this culture. We all value just something as simple as an iPhone, or a particular car, or a particular type of shoes, or kind of all the material things that we all value. Not everybody in this country has equal access to the means to buy those things legitimately. So not everybody has equal access to education or good jobs. And so he suggests that puts a strain on some people, and it's that strain to get those things that people value that causes people to get those things in non-legitimate means. In other words, they commit crime to get money to buy those things. General strain theory was created by Robert Agnew, and it uses the word strain a little bit differently. He sees strain as events and conditions that are disliked by individuals. The inability to gain what a culture values, strain theory, all of those things that we all want, was only one condition. He suggested that losing something of value or being treated badly can also cause strain. So it's not just for Agnew, it's not just not having the money to buy those things or to get the things that any culture values that causes strain. Strain also can be caused by being treated badly by a culture or by a group, or losing something that you value. So strain is really kind of the central theme for both of these theories, and it's this strain that causes people to engage in criminal behavior. And again, those are very old theories that came out of sociology. Nonconformist perspective assumes that humans are basically undisciplined and without the constraint of laws and rules would commit all kinds of crimes. So it's the idea that we don't have kind of internal control, that we would run amok if we didn't have laws, so to speak. There are a couple of different theories under this perspective. First, we have biological theories. Humans are fundamentally unruly and deviant, again, and caused by biological means. in other words, our biology, our genetics, our brain, the way that we've evolved over time just suggests that, according to this perspective, humans are just kind of unruly and deviant, and we need rules and laws to control us. Social control theory is really popular, by the way. This is Travis Hershey. And most of Travis Hershey's work was related to juveniles. But Travis Hershey's theory suggests crime and delinquency happens when a person has weak or non-existent ties to conventional order or normative standards. Innate tendencies for bad behavior need to be controlled by society, according to Hershey. And again, this was created when Hershey created this, it was to try to explain juvenile delinquency. And he suggested that juveniles that don't have ties to something that is important to them in their culture, whether that's family, their church, their school, their friends, sports, whatever it is, if they don't have some type of attachment to one of those things, then they are more likely to engage in juvenile delinquency. If a juvenile does have a healthy attachment to family, to school, to playing sport, to church, to a group of friends, then they're more likely to toe the line, so to speak, because that pressure, that social pressure, kind of keeps them in line, according to Hershey. General theory of crime, called GTS, Hershey teamed up with Michael Gottfredson for this one, and this theory suggests that deficits in self-control and self-regulation is the key factor. This is a prominent contemporary theory because we now know that the frontal lobes regulate self-control. And the frontal lobes are the last part of the brain to mature. Our frontal lobes, which are, by the way, right behind our forehead, are the executive seat of the brain and are responsible for all of our higher order processes. And they don't mature until we're about 25. So it's kind of a biological explanation on why juveniles engage in risky behavior. They lack self-control. They can't regulate their own behavior very well. So this one's pretty prominent. Kind of along these same lines is biosocial criminology. And biosocial criminology is kind of a newer perspective in criminology. And by new, I mean the last 15 or 20 years. I have a former professor at Florida State University named Kevin Beaver, who is really one of the leading researchers in biosocial criminology. And it looks at, what's interesting about biosocial criminology is it looks at those biological factors like frontal lobes, and it also looks at social factors, not having equal access to the things that we value in this culture. So it kind of combines both perspectives, both popular perspectives in criminology to explain criminal behavior. So super popular biosocial criminology. Learning perspectives. He suggests humans are born neutral and learn behaviors from their social environment. A couple of different ideas under this. Differential association theory. This is by Sutherland, who is a very popular sociologist. And he said that people learn behavior through interactions with other people at home, at school, and within their society. And social learning theory, this is a very popular theory out of psychology and was actually created by Albert Bandura in the 1960s. Albert Bandura suggested that people learn behavior, including criminal behavior, by observing other people. He actually called it modeling, or you could also say imitation. But it's just the idea that we learn some of our behaviors by observing people around us, particularly people that are important to us. So our family of origin, our friends, but it could go out a little further. If you grow up in a really dangerous neighborhood, for example, you might learn criminal behaviors because they're kind of the norm in that neighborhood. These kind of theories are really helpful in explaining things like gang behavior, actually. And then we have the developmental approach. Developmental psychology, if you've never taken developmental psychology, looks at all aspects of human development from conception to death. And when we look at criminal behavior and the developmental approach, we're usually looking at childhood. So what happens in childhood that contributes to delinquent, antisocial, or even later criminal behavior? So the developmental approach suggests that behaviors begin in childhood and evolve over the lifespan. And what's interesting about the developmental approach, it's a really big perspective in psychology, and it pulls in from a lot of other perspectives. So it looks at social factors, it looks at biological factors, it looks at psychological factors. Everything that could possibly affect somebody during childhood is looked at when we look at developmental approaches. So we're really just looking at, what is happening during childhood? What is happening during even, during the prenatal environment, exposure to toxins that affect brain development. So looking at all of those things and how they could contribute to criminal behavior. All right, when we look at disciplinary perspectives in criminology, criminology is an interdisciplinary field, meaning we see the value in other perspectives. So sociology, psychology, biology. So sociological criminology examines the relationship of demographic and group variables to criminal behavior, looks at underlying social conditions, and those conflict theories, those strain theories that we just talked about would be example of sociological theories. Any social factors that are related to criminal behavior or that contribute to criminal behavior are really going to come from the perspective of sociology. Psychology, and this is a perspective that we're going to focus on a lot in this class because we're looking at the psychology behind criminal behavior. So psychological criminology is looking at the mental processes of people who commit crimes. We can look at, within that idea of psychology, cognitive psychology. Cognitive, the word cognitive means thinking. So any thinking processes that happen, looking at neurology, looking at the biology, particularly with the brain, with biology, but also with genes, looking at how we just talked about developmental psychology, what kind of, what factors are happening, particularly during childhood, that could potentially contribute to criminal behavior. And then trait, that's looking at personality traits. So what personality traits contribute to criminal behavior? And under the idea of personality, we also have personality disorders. So something like antisocial personality disorder, that is having a set of maladaptive personality traits. And people, as we'll learn as we go through the course, people with that personality disorder are more likely to commit crime than other personality disorders or other mental health issues. But we'll definitely be looking at mental health issues as well. Now, psychology and psychiatry. What's the difference between the two? Psychologists have an academic PhD. Psychiatrists are medical doctors. So when we talk about psychiatric criminology, we are looking at medical doctors. And with psychiatry, we are looking more at mental illness. And so with psychology, we can look at developmental issues, we can look at your biology, we can look at your thinking, we can look at your personality traits. With psychiatry, we're really looking at mental illness. So that's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and they tend to focus on serious mental illnesses like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Those would be examples of the more serious mental health issues that psychiatrists would study. We also have both, you can have a forensic psychologist and forensic psychiatrist, and both of those are psychologists and psychiatrists that specialize in legal issues and how mental health issues and the legal system kind of come together. All right, so that brings us to measuring crime. Now that we've looked at the perspectives and some of the theories, and we'll definitely come back to those as we move through the course. When it comes to measuring crime, and you've probably heard of these before, we look mostly at official police reports, and that includes the Uniform Crime Report and the NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Both of these were created and are maintained by the FBI. The Uniform Crime Report is probably the gold standard in looking at criminal behavior, looking at crime rates, how crime changes over time, trends in crime. Both the Uniform Crime Report and the NIBRS get their information from police departments. So when an arrest is made, that information is given to the FBI and put into these crime databases. The Uniform Crime Report is really interesting and helpful for looking at crime rates. When you look on the Uniform Crime, the UCR page, they show it as percentage of crime known to the police per 100,000 of the population. What we don't get is clearance rates. We don't get conviction rates. We only get arrest rates when we look at the Uniform Crime Report and the NIBRS. One of the problems with the Uniform Crime Report is it has something called the hierarchy rule. And that means that when a number of offenses are committed by an offender, only the most serious offense is going to be included in the Uniform Crime Report. So, for example, let's assume somebody is arrested for robbery, rape, and murder of the same victim. The only thing that will be reported is the homicide. So we don't get the information on the robbery or the rape. The other problem with both of these is discretionary decision-making by law enforcement. They decide what to send to the FBI to include in both of these reports. So, I mean, they could decide which crime is most serious. They could decide which crimes they don't want to report. Maybe they don't want to look like they have a high homicide rate in their city, so they don't want to report everything, or a high robbery rate, or things like that. The other thing to keep in mind when looking at these, both of these, are the dark figure of crime. The dark figure of crime is a term used to describe all of the crimes that we don't know about. Remember, with the UCR and the NIBRS, these are crimes that are actually reported to the police, and the police make an arrest. If a crime is never reported, it's never going to get recorded in the Uniform Crime Report or the NIBRS. And we have a lot of criminal behavior, a lot of crime that takes place that never gets reported to the police. So those are something to keep in mind when you're looking at official statistics. There are some crime categories that are more likely to include lots of the dark figure of crime. Domestic violence, rape, sexual assault of children, those are all categories that are highly underreported. The next are self-report studies. The self-report studies are really interesting because they include crimes that are not reported to the police. So self-report studies are interviews with criminals, interviews with victims. There are a lot of different ones out there, by the way. And it gives us a better approximation of criminal activity, a lot of people think. So there are a lot of different types of self-report studies. You can give self-report studies to offenders. You can give them to victims. You see victimization studies there. So self-report studies are, the idea behind them is that we're probably tapping into that dark figure of crime. So a lot of people think that self-report studies are a little bit more accurate in terms of the number of crimes actually committed. Another interesting thing about self-report studies, is that when you're interviewing criminals, we can get what's called nomothetic data. And this is basically statistics on offenders and criminals. And nomothetic data is put together by the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. And you find these statistics in what's called the FBI Crime Classification Manual. We use these statistics in criminal investigations and criminal profiling. There's a great television show on Netflix. You may have already seen it. It's called Mindhunter. I think there are 2 seasons of Mindhunter, and although it is a show that is an entertainment show, it is how the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit was created and how they gathered data to come up with all of these statistics that they use in the FBI classification manual. So you can do a lot of interesting things with self-report studies of offenders. Now, with victims, the National Crime Victim Survey, it's called the NCVS, is probably the biggest and most widely used victimization survey. And you get more information about the victim. You get more information about victim's age, where they were when the crime took place, all kinds of information. And they also collect information about the offender too. They ask the victim, who was the offender? Was he related to you? Was, all that kind of stuff. And again, these victimization surveys, they look at what happened, where and when the offense occurred, whether there was injury or loss. Was the crime reported to the police? If not, why not? Look at the victim's perspective on the offender in terms of gender, race, and age, and also relationship patterns, and that's really helpful with interpersonal violence, also called domestic violence. So it's believed that these victimization surveys might give us a better idea or more accurate picture of crime because it includes crimes that are never reported to the police. So super popular and very interesting. So the Uniform Crime Report that we just talked about, it is the most cited source of crime statistics. Again, it only includes crimes that are known to the police and arrest, permits a comparison of national data broken down by age, sex, race, and offense. And it has 2 parts to it, Part 1 crimes and Part 2 crimes. Part 1 crimes are the more serious crimes, and Part 2 crimes are the less serious crimes, like property crimes. The violent crimes, the more serious on the Part 1, are murder and non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And then Part 2 is the property crimes that are less serious. In terms of victimization, they're definitely serious in terms of financial loss, but in terms of these are crimes against people, these are crimes against property, and you can see the list of those there. I already mentioned that it calculates the crime rate per 100,000 of the population. It does not include clearance rates. We do not know if a case was, we don't know how a case is, how a case ends. If the charges are dropped, if the person is convicted, if there's a plea, we don't have any of that. We only have the arrest rate. We talked about the hierarchy rule and the dark figure of crime and why those are problems with the Uniform Crime Report. And we also talked about the discretionary decision-making of what crimes are going to be reported to the FBI. And cybercrime is not included in the Uniform Crime Report. Now, the NIVRS was actually created after the Uniform Crime Report, and it was initiated as a supplement to the Uniform Crime Report to kind of address some of the shortcomings of the Uniform Crime Report. It has Group A and Group B. Group A are 46 serious offenses, and Group B are the less serious, more property crime type of offenses. The advantage is that it does examine bias crimes, the presence of gang activity in communities, crimes against law enforcement officers, and data on cargo theft. The self-report studies that I just talked about, whether it's with offenders or with victims, probably, again, gives us a more accurate depiction because it is including all of those crimes that are never reported to the police. So with self-report studies, your textbook is focusing mainly on doing self-report studies or interviews with people who are incarcerated. And again, Mindhunter is a great example of that, particularly season 1 on how the FBI started doing that to collect and create what we call nomothetic data or statistics. And there are a lot of different types of self-report studies out there in the criminal justice field and criminology. There are a lot of drug use self-report surveys. This is how we kind of understand and know what drugs are being used, particularly with juveniles. But these are a couple of the different drug surveys that are done. They also sometimes do surveys of people as they're arrested, asking them, what drugs they've been taking. Did they drink when they, were they using alcohol? What drugs were they using, when they committed their offense? That kind of gives us an idea of the connection between drug use and abuse and criminal behavior as well. We talked about the National Crime Victim Survey. This is a big survey, and it's been around a very long time. It gives us more information on the victim. It gives us a little bit more information on the offenders. And it really taps into that dark figure of crime because it includes crimes that are never reported to the police. And since this crime survey does ask people, did you report it? And if they say no, they ask why not. It also gives us an understanding of why people choose not to report criminal behavior. The National Crime Victim Survey results show victimization incidents have decreased in recent years. And actually, even the Uniform Crime Report shows crime rates have been going down. What we do find is demographic differences in victimization rates, meaning based on age, race, ethnicity. While it might go down within one group, it might go up within another group. Also gives us really important information about, as I mentioned earlier, relationship patterns with intimate partner violence and also family violence as well. All right, juvenile delinquency. Juvenile crime, well, first of all, juvenile delinquency, when we use that term, we're talking about antisocial and or criminal behavior on juveniles, and technically that's under the age of 18. Overall, juvenile crime has decreased since the 1990s, but juvenile delinquency is also one of those areas where we have a high rate of that dark figure of crime because not all juvenile criminal behavior is reported to the police. A lot of parents take care of that. For example, maybe a juvenile breaks into a neighbor's house and the parents don't want to report it, so they take care of the financial losses. Now, when it comes to juvenile delinquency, juveniles who break any of our laws, that would be called a delinquent. But they also have something called status offenses that only apply to juveniles. So status offenses are rules that are just under the age of 18 or 21 when it comes to drinking. So underage drinking, example of a status offense. Truancy, an example of status offense. Running away, staying out after curfew, smoking cigarettes, all of those are examples of status offenses. If you're over the age of 18, it's not a crime. If you're under the age of 18, it is considered to be a crime. So status offenses only apply to juveniles. And again, not perfect data, so keep that in mind when you're looking at official reports because a lot of juvenile delinquency is never reported to the police. The good news with juvenile delinquency, the research shows that the vast majority of young people who engage in criminal behavior during their teenage years actually age out of it once they get into their 20s and they never commit a crime again. So that's the good news with juvenile delinquency. We have a completely separate juvenile delinquency, court system for juveniles. So the adult criminal court system, and then separately we have the juvenile court system. Technically, the juvenile court system is not a criminal court system. and we have different rules that apply to juveniles. So two completely different systems. The goal of the adult criminal court system is punitive, punish. The juvenile system technically is designed to rehabilitate. So two completely different court systems and sets of rules and even terms that are used for juveniles. We do have a great juvenile delinquency course here at the university. If you're interested in taking that, the whole course focuses on issues related to juvenile delinquency, looking at theories on juveniles, looking on social factors, emotional factors, psychological factors that contribute to criminal behavior. Really interesting class if you're interested in working with juveniles when you graduate, or you're just interested in juvenile delinquency in general. The legal definitions can be difficult with crime and delinquency, again, because we have those status offenses. Every state has different criminal codes, and that's for juveniles and for adults as well. All states all have different court systems. Every state in the United States has the right to come up with their own laws, their own punishments for different crimes, their own court system. Of course, now we have federal statutes, but every state is a little bit different, which makes defining crime and delinquency a little bit different. A little bit difficult. All right, so that was a brief introduction. Go ahead and read the chapter, and it will expand on some of these ideas. I'm not able to kind of hit on everything that's in a chapter, so this is just meant to kind of be an introduction and an overview of the chapter. If you have any questions on anything in Chapter 1, let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day.